Lafayette County, Missouri in September 1861 was a time when it was legal to grow marijuana, or hemp as it was called in the 19th century. In the South, cotton was king, but in Missouri, marijuana was. Many towns along the Missouri River thrived off the profitable hemp industry, building many hemp farm factories. Lexington, Missouri was one such town. The breed of hemp grown at the time was not for smoking and never had any of the chemical compounds to give smokers a high, but instead was bred for rope and textiles from its fibrous stalks. In the summer of 1861, the state of Missouri had not seceded from the Union, but rebels from Missouri set up their own government in exile and fighting broke out in the state. In Lexington, there were 3,500 federal and home guard troops converting the old Masonic College atop the biggest hill in town into their fort. Coming up from the south was General Price with his 7,000 soldiers who just won a recent battle at Wilson's Creek. Hemp factories stood at the bottom of the hill with big hemp bales lined up close to be processed into rope. After an attempt by the Union men to dislodge the Missourians on the 18th from a mansion that stood between the trenches and the river, Price's men had the Yanks completely encircled. On the evening of the 19th, a local resident came up with a plan to defeat the Federals. By soaking the giant hemp bales and pushing them up the hill, the hemp could be used as a moving breastworks. The next morning, the Union men awoke to see a line of more than 100 hemp bales snaking across the hill, facing the river. Behind each bale, 3 or 4 men pushed towards the Federal trenches. Panicking, the Yanks tried in vain to set the bales on fire by using hot shot in their cannons. A few bales broke apart only to be replaced by other bales. The Missourians kept pushing closer until the Federals ran out of food, water, and supplies. Cut off from reinforcements, the Union men surrendered to the rebels. From that time on, the battle became known as the Battle of the Hemp Bales, the first battle in which marijuana played a key role. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which was created mostly behind closed doors by the Senate and 75th Congress, was the first blow to hemp farmers. Farmers had to pay a tax on hemp sold or face hefty fines and prison terms if ignored. Experts say the law was enacted to make hemp farmers less of a competition to special business interests such as synthetic fiber, drug, and timber industries. In 1916, George Schlichten invented a machine called a decorticator. This is a machine that made hemp processing cheap, fast, and more available to more farmers. A real threat to businesses relying on petroleum and wood-based products, since hemp would now be easier to turn into similar products at a fraction of the cost. Lobbying efforts by these different established industries and using the available media of the time, marijuana was demonized and then linked directly to the hemp industries, putting the full legal force of government against farmers, ending an entire historic industry. In 1937, Assassin of Youth was a film that tried to dramatically link all crimes to marijuana use, especially murder. Marijuana was a great theme to capitalize on if you were a filmmaker or newspaper. The government simply took the Mexican slang term for cannabis and called it marijuana. The same audience members who used cannabis previously to treat their ailments would see these movies not knowing they were treated with the drug that the movie was demonizing. It may surprise many, but medical marijuana today is nothing new. Many people knew of its benefits even at the time. The film may seem over the top today, but back then many people believed it without giving it a second thought. This is partly why the laws still enforced today are not based on any scientific proof of the drug being a real menace to society. In 1931, a Louisiana court quoted the fictional story that the movie was based on to support its findings that marijuana posed a threat to the community in State v. Benoa. In 1942, The U.S. government reversed its stance to meet the needs of the military because Japan had invaded the Philippines, and they were our main supplier of hemp at the time. Then in 1946, it was re-banned after the war once again. Missouri was one of the top hemp-producing states in the country. Our state was even noted in the government-produced film Hemp for Victory as an ideal place for its production.
The Conestoga wagons and prairie schooners of pioneer days were covered with hempen canvas. Indeed, the very word canvas comes from the Arabic word for hemp. In those days, hemp was an important crop in Kentucky and Missouri.
Industrial hemp and its separate narcotic offspring were both banned together as one, even though industrial hemp is completely safe and was done so at a major loss to the farming community as well as our tax base. So what does this ditchweed ban cost Missouri? An audit of all 50 states was done in 1998 by Vermont legislator Fred Maslack. Missouri ranked third in the highest total cost to its citizens. His findings for the year 1996 showed total cost to Missourians was $535,038 to remove our state's ditchweed. Only 0.04%, or about $214 of that money, was actually used to find narcotic plants that were cultivated by criminals. If it takes only 30 seconds for the DEA and local authorities to locate and destroy one plant, this is a total of about 13,074 total man-hours, or 544 total days of labor for that year. Time and money that could be spent finding drunk drivers and real threats to our citizens. So what happened to hemp? After just a few emails, we were able to find a farmer in northern Missouri where some original hemp farms existed in 1861 and where hemp still thrives naturally in the wild. Shelley was nice enough to show us her farm and explain how hemp, or ditchweed, was growing on her property despite it being banned. We're hiding Shelley's real identity for reasons you will see later on in this film.
What is this property we're on, and what is behind you?
Well, this property is in County, Missouri, and it is a farm that my husband and I have owned for about 22 years. And we're looking back here at some wild remnants of the hemp plant. I'm not sure if this was maybe originally a hemp farm. I know in years past it was a hog farm. And I know the people who have owned it for the last 2 or 3 generations, so it would have had to have been before that. Maybe they grew hemp here. But you can see that it's still growing very prolific. And the area that we're standing in now is actually a cow lot that we run cattle on, so it gets very well fertilized. So I'm thinking by the size of this that maybe that it's doing quite well from the fertilization of that. And we have had a drought here in the last, I want to say maybe 3 months. We've had just over 2 inches of rain.
Wow.
But it doesn't seem to be affecting the size of this hemp here that's growing.
Yeah, there's one plant back there that's probably 12 foot tall, I'd say.
Yeah, probably easily, because like I was saying, I'm 5'2", and you can see these plants are towering over me, so
yeah.
they're very, very large.
And so you have a cornfield that you've tried to grow corn in.
We do. We have field corn growing up on the hill over there. There's 66 acres of it here. And the drought has drastically affected its yield this year. So it just goes to show that some things in a drought year do very, very well, other things don't. And I think a lot of times it's those hybrids and those things that we genetically alter that don't do so well in those droughts. But things that are adapted to the drought tend to do a lot better, and we're seeing that here. So
is your corn GMO corn?
It is. Yes,
okay.
It is. So it is genetically altered.
And so this here might be, you said earlier, somehow related to the Battle of the Hemp Bales, and this might be a descendant of the same exact hemp that they use in that battle.
And it very well could be, because if you're talking about northwest Missouri, you're an hour from the Iowa border right here. So you really are in the northwest corner of Missouri. And so during those hemp bales, I'm sure there were a lot of hemp farms in this general area.
Yeah.
And with as much of it that's growing right here, I would say this is a remnant of one of those farms.
Wow.
So
It's really amazing.
yeah, it really is. And you can see some of it's going to seed too. So that's kind of interesting that, that it is going to seed. And so I've noticed, though, the ones that are going to seed tend to be the shorter ones for some reason. I'm not sure why that is, but
Yeah.
at least at this point it is. Maybe these taller ones just haven't seeded yet.
And so what if the local sheriff department were to come here? I mean, would they say to cut it down? Or?
I know traditionally in years past, this plant, believe it or not, was actually harvested by enterprising individuals who thought they could sell this as a drug for local individuals willing to pursue such things. When that happened, they would go in, they would make them shut it down. They basically would mow it off, chop it up, whatever they could do. Obviously, I mean, they can tell this is not being harvested, this is not being cared for. It truly is growing wild. But I think areas where it shows any kind of TLC that shows that maybe they are trying to grow it for that type of a harvest, they would ask them to mow it. They may even face legal ramifications from it. They may be charged with growing an illegal plant. But from this standpoint, I think the worst thing they would do is say, hey, you might want to mow that off.
Now, can I ask you, what is your stance? I had some hemp oil in the van, and they make oil out of this, and they sell it to us from Canada, and it's the same plant. Do you think that it's kind of strange that this plant is outlawed, especially since it grows wild like this? I
do. I think there's better ways to spend their time and better ways to spend their money than worrying on things like that. I think if it has a health benefit, you were mentioning the omega oils that are in it naturally. If it has a health benefit, why not capitalize on that and create a crop for people where they can make a little bit of money? Have to see how that all plays out in the end.
Well, if you had a choice now, looking at this crop behind you, which is green, it looks healthy, it looks like living plants, and then looking at your cornfield,
right.
If you had the option between this, which is drought resistant possibly, and corn, what would your choice be? I mean,
Well, I think a lot of people would be receptive to it. I'm sure we certainly would if we could make money on it. If you didn't have to have a lot of specialized equipment and a lot of expense laid out that way, and you could grow it legally and know there was going to be a market for it, yeah, I would think that it would definitely go over. I mean, traditionally we did grow it as a crop. We did grow it for rope and for various other fibers, and I don't know why it couldn't be done again. But I think there's just so much fear out there that it's going to be used for something that it shouldn't be, that we lose sight of what benefits it could have too.
That's a good point. Now, I mean, you live in this area. Have you heard of anybody actually getting sick off of it or dying or addicted or anything like that?
Absolutely not. The only thing that I ever heard, this has been years ago, and when they would try to harvest this and they would grow it a little bit further north of here, people were getting headaches off of it. So, are you really going to try to smoke something that's just going to give you a headache? I mean, I wouldn't personally, but, what do I know? I really just don't think it's the same caliber of what's being sold as a drug. I just think that's not what the plant was meant for.
Sure.
So I just don't think that's the benefit that it's going to give anybody.
All right.
So.
Well, I appreciate your interview. That's great.
So how much of this wild plant does the DEA end up removing every year? Let's take a look at what John Walters of the DEA has to personally say about his job eradicating cannabis. Then let's look at the numbers.
Finding and destroying the gardens has become a top priority for the nation's drug czar, John Walters. In 1 week, as part of a covert operation, authorities say they destroyed 340,000 plants and arrested 36 suspects.
These aren't Cheech and Chong plants, and people who farm now are not doing this for laughs, despite the fact Hollywood still thinks that. They're doing it to make a lot of money, and the single biggest source of the money for the guys with the horrific violence along the border on the Mexican side and on our side now are making it from marijuana.
So while John Walters is correct that drug cartels reap rewards from prohibition to fund their cartels, it doesn't tell the whole story, especially here in Missouri. Using the DEA's own figures, the Sourcebook of Criminal Justice Statistics 2003 compiled all cannabis-related data in one place. Inside, it shows that in 2003 the DEA removed 4,489,850 wild ditchweed plants in our state, of which they found 14,285 plants cultivated for smoking with psychoactive THC. That means that over an astounding 99% of what the federal DEA destroys right here at home is harmless ditchweed. It also means that hardworking farmers just like Shelley are 99% more likely to get a knock on the door than organized criminals, even though ditchweed grows naturally just like dandelions. The most ironic aspect to the eradication of wild hemp is that these plants produce high amounts of the chemical cannabidiol, or CBD. Research indicates that CBD acts as an antipsychotic and may counteract the potential effects of THC, the chemical that produces a high in smoked strains. This is akin to banning poisonous snakes and then banning anti-venom out of fear of the snakes themselves. But that is not the only unscientific problem with the government's stance on hemp in Missouri. Wild hemp, when left to grow, diminishes the THC levels in narcotic plants cultivated around the hemp. Growers who want their plants to give users a high separate male and female plants. This is because once pollination begins, the THC content is dampened by 50%. So by cutting down ditchweed that would pollinate nearby narcotic plants, the DEA ensures that growers will have the strongest possible high for their clients. The DEA and other law enforcement are literally making things worse for themselves while complaining that cannabis is stronger today than in the past. In other words, banning hemp has absolutely no scientific basis in the protection of Missourians. There are over 25,000 uses for hemp. Christopher Columbus had crates full of hemp seed to eat on his ships when he discovered our continent. Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence on hemp paper. These drafts still exist today, which attest to the quality and longevity of hemp paper products. Our first Navy used sails made from hemp, and our founding fathers grew it on their farms. Today, there are paper, body care, construction, livestock, medical, plastic resins, essential oils, nutritional supplements, fuels, and more that can be created from this individual plant. It is also a great fiber for textiles. This scarf, which is made from 55% hemp, was sold to raise funds for our current President Barack Obama. Hemp could truly help our economy if we were to utilize it today, especially in our faltering economy. The fact is, the entire history of our country was built on hemp. The colonists and founding fathers never had any problems like our government suggests today. Banning it makes absolutely no sense. The United States is the only major industrialized nation to ban it to this day. Farmers who are interested in benefiting from this plant will have to unite and lobby their elected officials. Until this happens, most likely the government's stance will not change regardless of the economic losses to family farmers, not only in Missouri but surrounding states. Next on our tour is Springfield, Missouri. Springfield, Missouri is one of our country's most conservative small cities. It has 436,712 inhabitants, half of which support legalization. There are 38,867 current and past cannabis users in the city. So where can these users be found today? Since the 30s, recreational and medical cannabis use has gone underground. Springfield is no exception. You can visit a yearly cannabis festival called Hemp Fest and go to shops catering to the city's large underground community. These shops walk a fine legal line, and just mentioning cannabis in them can get you removed. If a shop admits to selling items for the purpose of cannabis use, they can also be shut down. In them you will find smoking pipes, legal smoking alternatives, activist apparel, and more. They even have a worldwide presence on the internet where online reviews reveal the true intent of their products. You can even find indoor cannabis growing books in the local mall showing how to thwart authorities. Both normal and Show Me Cannabis regulation work to decriminalize both cannabis in recreational and industrial form. Councilman Doug Burleson and Miranda Reynolds of Show Me Cannabis moderated an open cannabis forum for the public where we found an activist that may at first seem surprising.
I'll just make a comment that Dr. Gill here is not revealing his full credentials because he may still be employed by the state of Washington. I don't know, but he was.
Well,
they have a medical marijuana law out there, and he was involved with the medical side of that. And so he has insights into many things that hardly anybody in Missouri knows about.
Intrigued, we stopped by Dr. Gill's immediate care facility where he gave us the insights he had on the controversial topic of medical cannabis. Gail Mobley is a practicing occupational medicine doctor and a board-certified residency-trained emergency trauma doctor. Dr. Gill was nice enough to take some time out after working on a patient who had hurt himself on the job. His private practice is like a 24/7 on-call minor emergency room for local companies in Springfield.
I first became interested in medical cannabis when I went out to Washington State. I was an ER doc out on the far west coast. We're talking about out in the peninsula. And some of the elderly population had asked me to participate or write them medical cannabis authorizations. And being from Missouri, I was shocked. It surprised me, particularly in that mindset that a grandma would say that she needed some cannabis for her pain and it worked better than anything else. But I returned to Missouri and opened my offices there, but I kind of always kept my ear to the ground, and I soon learned that there was an urgent need in the state for a doctor to do medical cannabis authorizations in a medically legitimate, medically defensible manner, because we were finding that some sloppy work had thrown patients in jail, and that there was this huge need. I went out to Washington, in addition to practicing emergency medicine, wrote some disability determinations and some medical cannabis authorizations on patients that had legitimate diagnoses according to the state law. And it was then that I got an appreciation for the medicinal aspects of the medical cannabis. Most of the patients that I saw would be using it for pain, and it would be extremely helpful for pain. Invariably, the story after I would see the patient and authorize them when they come back for the rechecks were that, oh my God, my life has changed since I'm off the oxycodone. My life has changed since I'm off the methadone. These people were addicted to narcotics, and sure, cannabis on a regular basis is not a good idea, but there is a lesser of two evils, and this narcotic addiction is the worst of two evils. So most of the remarkable stories have to do with that. There are stories about Crohn's disease. It is a remarkable antispasmodic. It works for seizures and some epilepsy is noted to be significantly helped with pain. Multiple sclerosis. Again, that was a disease that you have to make sure that everything else is failed, nothing else works, because there are things a lot better than cannabis to treat some of these conditions initially. A doctor looking at a patient to assess whether or not they're eligible or a candidate for cannabis has to be seeing a patient that everything else has failed and nothing else works better, and they're not doing it in a manner that would compromise their health. As to whether or not cannabis can help PTSD, again, it's like pain. It depends on where you are with this. It can certainly make it worse, or it can make it better. If you're to the point that you have compensatory mechanisms and you're not going to be escalating it and making a mole into a mountain, then cannabis can help in situations like that. Most states are slow to bring PTSD on the list of indications for medical cannabis, but again, it's like pain. It can help some patients and it can be a detriment. But again, if a patient reports that cannabis helps them, then I'll go ahead and be prone to consider authorization. But I generally have never or rarely authorized cannabis in a cannabis-naive patient. If they can't tell me that it works fine and they tolerate the side effect and it works better than anything else, generally I tell them, I don't want to start you down the road of trying something that you may not like, may have a bad example, or may be some addictive type problems. I generally prefer my patients say, yeah, I've tried it, it works better than anything else, and I tolerate the side effects, so I'm doing it in a manner that doesn't harm my body. Then those are the prerequisites that I would use. That's something else I need to talk to patients about when they're in the office is that, yes, cannabis can be addictive. It depends on your definition of addiction, but so can TV, so can playing with my dog and shopping, and so can eating. What is an addiction? Well, it's a compulsion. You are continually driven to it, like the compulsion of when someone's idle for a moment, you pull out your cell phone and you go to town, seeing who's texting. It's a compulsion to, when you're hungry, even though you know nothing's in the fridge, to go and open it up anyway. You look at that same empty fridge. Those are compulsions. So an addiction is a compulsion. It's a continuation of the event in light of negative consequences. You continue to abuse the alcohol, or you continue to smoke, or you continue to smoke the marijuana or the nicotine, despite the cost, despite the risk of cancer, despite losing your job. So it's a continuation of the habit despite negative consequences, and it's a craving when it's gone. If I can't get my Morning Joe MSNBC liberal morning TV, I crave it. I mean, that affects my morning if I don't get a laugh of humor and cynicism of the world affairs. So yes, I guess TV can be addicting, and playing with my dog, the negative consequences are I'm late for work, playing with my dog, my shoulder hurts from my rotator playing tug of war. But it's a continuation of it despite the consequences. But is it physiologically addictive like alcohol and nicotine? Do I have seizures withdrawing from cannabis? No, it's not physiologically addicting, but it can be psychologically addicting. So it's important that patients understand that cannabis can be psychologically addicting, but not necessarily physiologically addicting. We were talking about that a doctor recommending medical cannabis must be very careful to make sure the patient is right for it, that cannabis isn't right for all patients. As a matter of fact, for instance, with pain, it can make patients worse. They can have an increase of their pain, or at least the perception of the pain. Cannabis works oftentimes on how you think about things, and you can make a molehill into a mountain. The pain, they can fixate, will it ever go away? Will I ever be able to return to the activities that I really like? So it basically depends on where you are with your pain, whether or not cannabis can, A, help. Not only can it distract a person from their pain and their thoughts, but it also has some anti-inflammatory properties. Over the past 10 years, we found out that it has receptors in the body that are natural cannabinoid receptors that we're born with, that these CBDs, these cannabinoids, type 1 and type 2, are actually anti-inflammatory, just like ibuprofen or naproxen or those type medicines are, that has some real true anti-inflammatory effects, in addition to the psychoactive effects of things that lift the spirits and make you hungry, that sometimes connect the dots of things you wouldn't normally think about. And the West Coast, as a matter of fact, there is a swing towards the cannabis that the pain patients are using to have more CBD content and less the active THC, where there's less of a psychoactive component, because they want it for pain control, not necessarily the giggly high, let's eat and think about some pretty cool stuff. A doctor must be very careful if they recommend medical cannabis, because the first rule of medicine is first, do no harm. The actual concept of smoking cannabis has to be offensive to any physician, and it is. I make my patients sign a statement that they will not smoke, that they have a vaporizer, and they will use a vaporizer. So what is a vaporizer? Well, the THC in the actual plant is not psychoactive. It has to be heated to become psychoactive. You can eat a bud, and it's not going to affect you at all. I hear that there's some anti-inflammatory component, but it's not going to give you the buzz. To be active, the bud has to be heated. Most often it's smoked, as in a pipe or a joint or something like that. It can be baked, we've all heard of the brownies, or it can be vaporized. That's a device where you put real hot air through the bud or the actual green leaf itself, and there's no combustion, there's no fire, but the hot air vaporizes the THC and leaves the cellulose and the plant material behind. So there's no products of combustion at all. There's no tar, there's no carcinogens. It's just a vapor with some THC in it. So, you know, that way it is not a problem as far as bronchiectasis on the airway irritation. So I make sure that patients are actually vaporizing as opposed to smoking. Oftentimes patients like to eat cannabis. That's a concern because it's difficult to dose. You don't know the strength of the bud you start with. It can vary from plant to plant, and certainly where on the plant the bud comes from, a highlight area or an older area down lower. You don't know how much is converted in the cooking process, and you don't know the speed which it's absorbed. But cannabis does have some side effects, as all medicines do. We've talked about Tylenol and Advil. You know, the list are pages long of the side effects of those. Well, cannabis does too, and I'm careful to go over with my patients, let them know that it does interfere with short-term memory. It does interfere with deep sleep, the REM sleep. It can deprive you of actually dreaming, and a person needs to dream. Otherwise, you have some issues with long-term memory if you don't dream, or conflict resolution if you don't dream. There are also oftentimes temperament issues. A person using cannabis oftentimes can get emotional, you know, smoke a joint, you walk into a Walmart card shop and pick up any card, you almost want to cry. It just connects with your emotions sometimes. The smallest things can also seem crazily funny, you know. The stereotypical person of smoking a joint is just you get the giggles and laugh your tail off. So it can take emotions and just really send them on a roller coaster. What doctor can comfortably recommend something that's against federal law and put patients in harm? You need to really understand where the patient is, what their need, and how you're going to serve them. They have to be very careful about recommending medical cannabis. I would tell any doctor to be very, very careful. When I started this realm, I was told by some other practitioners in other states to treat every patient as if they're wired for sound, you know, like they're a federal agent, you know, making sure that I'm asking the right questions. And because, you know, they allegedly aren't coming after doctors that are following state law, but they are going around shopping doctors to make sure that, you know, they are following the state law. It's a scary realm, I must admit. I don't cherish trembling when I go to the mailbox wondering if someone's filed a complaint on me. It's not a fun realm of medicine to practice. You got to be pretty brave to do it.
As unfortunate as it is that doctors like Gil Mobley have to worry about being thrown in jail for wanting to help their patients, the law is even more harsh on medical marijuana users in Missouri. We took a trip to Ozark to talk to just such a patient and his wife.
First on Fox, a playground equipment company in the Ozarks is the front for a drug operation.
A bust of the business within a business leaves 2 people behind bars tonight.
Investigators say the operation had a seemingly good cover. Looks can be deceiving. Just ask Jackie Peterson.
I've got small kids here, and so I'm glad that they found it.
She lives across the street from Ozark Mountain Playgrounds. A business that seemed to cater to children was hiding adult activity.
I've never seen them sell too many of those little playhouses. I wondered how they were making their money and had made a comment to my husband, kind of joking that they were drug dealers.
Our next story shows what the current laws and media persecution can do to people who decide to use cannabis to treat their ailments. This story is just one of hundreds like it across our state.
My name's Daryl Bertrand.
I'm Trish Bertrand.
And I am a grateful former medical cannabis user, and I'm the former owner of Ozark Mountain Playground. It was a sales, installation, and service company related to playground equipment here in Southwest Missouri. I had a pretty good thing going. Suffered a setback in my health and elected to find a cure for it because the doctors couldn't. They suggested things, and I went that route, which was for cannabis, because my liver had shut down. We can get into that multiple times.
Well, what was the medical issue that you had?
I have degenerative disc disease, spinal stenosis, and spondylolisthesis of the spine. Well, 3 years ago, I was told to have I have to have a spinal fusion, but they were unable to do it due to my elevated liver enzymes. At that time, I was a medical cannabis patient, but I had been using prescribed narcotics also, and didn't realize, the doctors and I, until we did some homework, didn't realize that that's what was elevating my liver enzymes, because as soon as I stopped taking pain medicine that was a narcotic, my levels slowly came down. And they didn't come back to actually every level being in the normal range till 3 months ago. So it took several years, but it took 9 months for them to come into a normal range for them to do my first spinal fusion.
So is what would happen if you continued down that road, you know, taking the narcotics and all that?
I probably more than likely would be dead, because the second time I had an episode, my liver enzymes were at a level where neither doctor had seen anyone alive at.
Before we continue, we asked Dr. Mobley his opinion on whether or not Daryl could have died from his narcotic painkillers.
This person has the same problem that so many patients in Washington State have, is that their body needs something for their pain, and they are taking it in a form that has acetaminophen in it, and it's killing off the liver. That's why the list for liver transplants is just so terribly long. So these patients are killing off the liver because of their need for the narcotic that has acetaminophen on it. And the cannabis can supplant that need, that craving for the narcotic. It can treat the pain without the side effects. It's not addicting, and it will totally, spare the liver, at least in comparison to the acetaminophen.
I had told them I was smoking a little bit of cannabis, and they said you probably should increase it, change the way you're smoking it to vaporizing it, which I did, because they don't like to operate on anyone who smokes. Doesn't matter what you smoke, like cigarettes. My surgeon particularly will not operate on you until you have kicked the habit due to the health issues that can occur while you're the anesthesia due to the length of the surgery.
I see.
And basically they stopped prescribing me anything in the book. They would give me anything I wanted, because my back was literally broken. It was offset 50%. My L4 had crushed my L5 and pushed into my S1. It basically was a train wreck down there. I was in a wheelchair for 4 months, waiting for the surgery. Got to a point where walking, anything in my daily life was very difficult to do.
So how did you hear about cannabis and its benefits?
Basically, I grew up not believing the lies that were told to me. I have a brother with epilepsy. Actually, 2 of my brothers are epileptic in some form or another. And my one brother is a medical patient in California, and it stopped his seizures. So, and I'd visit him every year out there, and through visits with him and talking with him, I knew I didn't need to smoke regular, what I'd call your cartel weed. I needed to smoke a medical grade cannabis that would work for my particular condition. And that would be one with a high CBD content and not a high THC content. One that would relieve my pain and still keep me as functionable as possible. Basically what happened is I would obtain my seeds on my trip to California. I'd go to California, visit my family there, obtain female seeds from co-ops and bring them back with me on the plane. My brother wanted to see how things had been progressing several years later. I'd been doing this for many years. contrary to what they thought. I had just started. Maybe they thought I had done maybe 2 batches. It was about my 6th or 7th batch. I've been doing it quite a while. I took some pictures, emailed them to my brother, deleted the pictures off my computer, which I guess they're still on your hard drive. You know, I'm computer literate, but not illiterate either. And computer got a virus, and I brought it into PC Outlet here in Ozark, who I thought I could trust. They'd done all my computer work before for us. And I guess he saw, for some reason he went digging through my deleted files to fix my virus, which there was no need to do, and forwarded the pictures, still pictures of inside my grow room, which had no identifying factors of where I was located, where this grow room could have been in China. There was no way to know. Forwarded the photos to the Comet Task Force here in Ozark. And thus, after their, I guess, 3-4 month investigation, a judge finally gave them a search warrant off of finding an empty pack of zigzag papers in my trash can.
That's something else. When we were caught by the police, we were 4 days out of the hospital from a second spinal fusion. He was down to 135.
Oh, about 155.
He was in a brace. I mean, it was pretty bad, and he was so unhealthy that they didn't even keep him in jail. And I sat for 24 hours. He sat for 4 because they knew they didn't have the medical capabilities to take care of him.
When I was arrested and brought into the Christian County Detention Center, I was examined by their nurse on staff. And her exact words to everybody there was, set a timer, don't keep them here more than 60 minutes. Due to my health condition and how fresh I was from out of the hospital. We can't keep them here, don't keep them here. I literally set the timer and push them out the door after an hour. It was 4.5 hours before I got released. Due to the fact that they wanted to keep, the media was still up at my place, my residence and my place of business. And they were busy, what's the word for it?
It was a media circus.
It was a media doing the media circus end of it to cover their ass, because they didn't find $30,000 in cash in my business. They were screaming when they raided me, where's the money? Where's the money? Before they even found the marijuana, which took them 15-20 minutes to find, they almost didn't find it. They were wanting cash resources for the seizure more than they were wanting the marijuana. And it was clear and evident in their actions and how they acted. And then when they didn't find it, the story they portrayed to the media and the lies they told them to make my business look bad because they didn't get the cash crop they were looking for.
So who was in charge of the police at that time?
The lead investigator was Detective Wells.
It was Comet, which is a multi-county drug task force. It's hard to say who's in charge.
There was a lead detective, but and the word was brought back to them. Even I wasn't there; she was there. So they took us one at a time down there, and the police officer made it clear and apparent to the lead detective there that I was going to be out in an hour. But somehow that got held up, which I had to try to. Very weak in nature, they brought a chair in for me to sit down, but I was afraid to touch anything in the jail because I had incisions in the front and the back. Didn't want to get a staph infection or anything while in that jail, but it was just amazing to me how they lied to the media and put a spin on it without any evidence that I was distributing it. Told them that I was using my business as a front to grow and sell marijuana when I wasn't. It was strictly for medical use. for me.
What would your life be like today if cannabis was actually legal in Missouri? What would have been different?
I mean, I was still disabled, but I probably would still have my business going in some form. The wife would be running it, and I would be watching what's going on. The business, the doors would still be open, and we'd be paying taxes versus being where we're sitting now. I'm on disability, and she's trying to find a job, but it's pretty difficult checking that felony box off on your application. Trying to let them get a second look at you. The whole crazy thing about this whole story is she doesn't use. She'd never been in my grow room. She couldn't make it in there. Never accessed it, never saw it, never helped with any part of it whatsoever. Clipping, drying out, nothing. She had zero to do with it. And she got charged harder than me because my medical condition
They didn't want to take
they
that
didn't
on.
want to take that on. So they went after basically an innocent bystander, and quote unquote in the state of Missouri, just if you have knowledge of someone growing something, you're breaking the law just as bad as the person who is cultivating.
And I'm using
People wonder how did you take care of it when you were having your surgeries and all that? I'm straightforward with it. I had friends who helped me. And they're never identifying to this day. And whether or not I'm still friends with any of these people now is nobody's business but mine and that person's. They firmly believed in what I was doing and wanted to help me for my medical reasons. They weren't in it for any benefit to themselves whatsoever. But we did lose a lot of sales, and it just, the media attention, it just made it a struggle, made it very difficult. It basically made it impossible.
It's an issue of we have the ability, the education, we are smart enough to decide what kind of medicines we can pick for ourselves. It's no longer an issue of people wanting to get high. It's a public safety issue. More damage is done to society than the use of cannabis itself. And again, the same religious people that are screaming, "You can't be gay because God doesn't make mistakes," are screaming, "God made a mistake. Eradicate the plant." It's their arguments are not logical.
I was grateful for the support our church showed us. No one was biased towards us, but they also were people who knew of my medical condition. They didn't know how I was electing to treat my pain. I kept that private and confidential. You know, I helped out in the local community in the youth sports. Those parents didn't know. My fellow coaches didn't know.
Can you tell everyone a little bit about your daughters and maybe how what their thoughts were on it and how it affected them? Did it follow them in school?
It's just changed their lives completely. There were parents out there who judged my children on my behavior, my choice of medicine, came out and told them that they cannot speak, even though they were close friends, cannot speak to them anymore, and to basically defriend, disassociate 100%. We would attend school functions. The first 2-3 school functions I attended, literally no one would be sitting in the bleachers in the entire row with me, in front of me, or behind me.
We moved from a really nice neighborhood where we knew all of the parents. The kids were always outside playing. We used to have impromptu softball games in our front yard. I mean, it was absolutely wonderful. We now have had to move to a neighborhood where there's 2 child predators.
On our street alone, and there's probably 6 within 200 yards.
We've had a alcohol-induced stabbing across the street from us. We no longer feel comfortable letting our kids outside.
Yep.
I mean, they are truly the innocent victims in our case because they didn't ask for it.
To illustrate how our government is disconnected from this issue, Councilman Jeff Seafried of Springfield had this to say about activists trying to pass an ordinance which lowers penalties against cannabis users.
Who's protecting the kids? I mean, kids in school. I feel like this is a selfish endeavor amongst people who have not proven that they're being unjustly convicted.
Oh, the human developing mind is an unknown phenomena, and we're still learning a lot about it. Cannabis has no room in the treatment of children, as far as I'm concerned.
Nobody wants kids to be using cannabis ever. That's not, but how can you justify telling for a kid using cannabis when you know that the punishment is going to be so damaging?
And then that same parent could be giving them a beer every Saturday night or watching them get drunk, and then that's okay.
Yeah, the police chief admits that the marijuana seems a little bit old-fashioned when compared to things like meth, which they are busting a lot, but says marijuana is still certainly a drug of choice for a lot of people in the area and can be used as a gateway to other forms of abuse.
It certainly can. It certainly can. It certainly can.
So what is behind the accusation that Comet Task Force asked Darrell Bertrand where his money was on the night he got busted? According to the Missouri Constitution, the clear proceeds of all penalties, forfeitures, and fines collected for any breach of the penal laws shall be distributed annually to the schools of all our counties. Forfeiture proceeds in Missouri by law have to go to the School Building Revolving Fund, administered by the Department of Revenue and audited by the state auditor. Unfortunately, the state police realize that if they work with the federal government instead of for the people, they can use up to 80% of confiscated money as they wish. In doing so, they divert all money to themselves instead of the schools as the law states. To illustrate this point, let's look in the report titled Office of the State Treasurer, Year Ended June 30, 2005. In 2001, over 3 million seized funds were diverted to our schools. Then in 2002, over 5 million was given to schools. In 2003, 7 million was given, but by 2004 the number has taken an unusual turn. In 2004, a mere $1,597 were in the revolving fund. Then by 2005, only $20 remained. The legal loophole they partake in is simple. All that is needed to get around the state auditors and keep confiscated money is to include any one of these federal agencies in the local drug investigations of our state. This sets up a new kind of seizure called a joint seizure. Not surprisingly, the DEA is one of the main tools used in the war on drugs and is used for this specific loophole. So while our state does a yearly audit, the numbers only show a small slice of all state cash seized. In fact, even state attorneys many times illegally decline to report their seized assets to the state auditor as shown here. The only way to find where the money went is to go directly to the federal government's own statistics. The money and assets hidden from state auditors in 2011 was over $11 million, money that was supposed to go to our schools. In April 2012, an audit of the St. Charles County Sheriff's Department confirmed the seized equitable money going right into the pockets of the officers. This equitable money should have gone right to the schools if the Constitution was followed. The report tells a story of how $141,100 was falsely claimed to be used by officers to clean their uniforms. One of the people at the forefront of forfeiture reform is Epen Thampi, who gave this speech at a Missouri cannabis gathering.
So, the story behind this is a bigger one, though, and it's a big picture one. It's important that you guys understand how this works. This works because the police target people like you, target the people that you might buy from. They target everyone in all walks of life because they know that they can take property, they can take vehicles, they can take houses, they can take cash on the mere suspicion that drugs are involved. Sometimes they don't even have to find anything. They just have to have a suspicion or a paid informant, or they can even take stuff from you on hearsay. They can take the stuff they can keep it for themselves, they can buy guns, they can buy iris scanners, big weapons, tanks. There's a sheriff in Georgia who has a tank. Columbia Police Department has an armored personnel carrier. Military-grade equipment. What happened was, and this is actually, it gets worse, if you can imagine that. It gets worse. Because in Missouri, the state constitution says that if the police take money or vehicles or houses from people, that forfeiture has to go to a state education fund. This education fund is the one that builds schools. In 1990, Odessa School District sued and won a Missouri Supreme Court decision that said that its county commissioners were wrong to give $1 million in forfeiture money to the cops. They won a decision. Immediately after that, the Department of Justice sent out a letter to Missouri's law enforcement agencies saying, hey, your state law says you have to give an education fund the cash. But we have a federal forfeiture law, so you come to us, we'll make the forfeiture, and we'll cut you a check for 80%. And in this way, Missouri state constitution and the direct intent of our state legislators was directly circumvented. In the past 2 years, they have taken between $50 and $70 million out of the pockets and out of the lives of Missouri citizens and people who visit our state. Often, these people are never convicted of a crime. Even where these people have committed a crime, they are often, the prosecutor will take their property and they won't have the ability to get the representation they need to contest these charges in a court of law. Now, I want to tell you that this is not just a Missouri problem. This is a 50-state problem. And this is the way that the drug war is funded. In 1993, the Department of Justice signed a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Defense that allowed them to buy used military equipment and send it to local law enforcement. So, here's the scam. They raid you, they take your stuff, then they use it to illegally buy guns to raid you again and buy more guns and pay for more police salaries and triple overtime hazard pay, because these SWAT officers in these raids get triple overtime pay because of hazard pay and because oftentimes they'll schedule these raids on weekends or on holidays. Can you imagine that? These people are in this business to get rich, but they're doing it at the expense of our lives, at the expense of our freedoms, at the expense of our democracy.
Did you shoot my dog? You shot my fucking dog! Oh my god! My dog is over there! What the fuck did you do that for?
Kathy, let's get her out to a car.
Yeah, they put her in the van or something.
What the fuck was that for? Sing out loud.
261 relating to prosecuting marijuana and paraphernalia cases in municipal court of the City of Springfield pursuant to applicable.
My name is Doug Burleson. I'm currently on the City Council here in Springfield with General Seat C. Shortly after high school, I think after a semester of college, I had always wanted to serve and look for the opportunity to go serve and earn some money for college. So I enlisted in the Army, got stationed, went to jump school and got stationed in the 82nd Airborne Division at Fort Bragg. Spent 4 years in the military. It was with we were part of the President's Rapid Deployment Force. So kind of had to be ready to go at any time to any particular conflict, anything like that. I was fortunate in that I didn't see any of that during my tenure there, but it was a good time and learned a lot of stuff. Well, there had been the initiative here in Springfield, which had kind of started the subject matter in the realm of City Council, if you will. And we had gotten some professional testimony from law enforcement, from county prosecutor. After listening through that, I realized, this is one side of the coin here, very skewed. So felt like we needed to have the opportunity before City Council voted on this to have a town hall where there was a little bit more open discussion. We had a former City Councilman, Dan Childs, there, and he spoke. I thought he gave us some really wise words. He had gone through a bout of prostate cancer, actually, and he's pretty much in remission now. He will attest to the fact that there's certain cannabinoids I'd say helped along with his healing. Well, the initiative, which groups of people went out and gathered signatures to get this on the ballot or to have City Council accept it. And it basically was if you were in possession of 35 grams or less of marijuana, that rather than it being a potential criminal violation, that it would just be a municipal infraction with a fine of $150. In lieu of any further instances, I believe over a certain period of time there would be records expunged, and it would also create a citizen committee that would help monitor the police department's compliance with the new ordinance, should the voters pass it or should the City Council. Good night. If let's say we're getting drugs from Mexico into the United States, why should we not consider that an attack on our sovereign country here and, use our military to get rid of the drug flow here into the United States? I'm happy to report that I've come to my senses since then. As far as governments instituting a system that prohibit people's enjoyment of a plant, just mentally when you think about it, wow, we have gotten so out of control with what we expect out of our government, and rarely people even bat an eye with this issue. Now, granted, there's a lot more education that's been happening, and I think a lot more people are coming around to their senses as far as this is really an inappropriate thing that we need to task our government, that our law enforcement with. We've got a lot more important things to do that we're authorized to do, to prosecute real crimes, murders, rapes, thefts, crimes that actually rob you of your rights or your property. You smoking a joint in your living room really doesn't hurt anybody at all, and the fact that we've got scores hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers across the country that are designated to attack that in itself, it's appalling. So it was just kind of a long gradual road that led to where I finally realized, wow, the war on drugs is just wrong. It's not only counterproductive, it's really not authorized by our Constitution. You know, I think, and I'm a constant critic, others are too, especially people that are interested in small government, that, you know, really, unless it's the basics, that the government has the tendency to screw up everything they try. I'd say one thing they did not screw up was the propaganda that they've been pushing on the public since the 20s. And I look at our experience here in Springfield and I'd say, man, that propaganda worked, because a lot of people still have these mindsets that, you know, you smoke a joint, you go temporarily insane and you do crazy stuff, and you know, it leads to crime and promiscuity, and you know, and if you follow Reefer Madness, you know, way back, that was one of the first pieces. You know, there was really quite a racist content to this prohibition too. Wow, we don't want our white women associating with men of mixed color or mixed races or what have you. I mean, that was part of the impetus, and people bought into it. So much so, I mean, good night, 75 years later, here we are still trying to overturn this. Well, I'd say if anything, it really just solidifies my decision on this issue. It solidifies my stance. That may sound counter to some people, but I think the point that a lot of people are missing is there are drugs in our schools today. They're full of them. On a side note, there are drugs in our jails. So if we can't keep drugs out of the most controlled situation that we can come up with as far as a jail or prison, you know, how can we expect to do that with schools? What it is, that's kind of a side effect of, it's an unintended consequence of this bad policy to begin with. Because a good friend of mine has said, you know, drug dealers don't look at IDs as far as if you're old enough and all that. They have an incentive to get school-age children involved because those kids don't suffer as harsh of penalties as adults do if they get caught. So if you're in the black market business of distributing drugs and making money, you know, you lessen your liabilities by involving more kids in your enterprise as much as possible. And here we are, schools full of drugs. A good point was made recently that, you know, the rates of kids drinking alcohol, even smoking cigarettes, are actually declining. But marijuana use is actually rising. And you have to go, okay, now legally speaking, kids ought to be able to get a hold of cigarettes and alcohol much easier. Well, you know, the opposite is actually kind of true. When it's illegal and the black market focuses on that market, it makes it that much easier for kids to get involved with it. So I look at my boys, and in the long run, I look at, you know, are we going to try to create situations where schools are actually safer? Well, then let's get rid of prohibition and let's regulate this much like we do, you know, alcohol and or cigarettes. You know, and I think that would lessen the impact that these drugs have on our schools. I think it helped solidify their opposition. I mean, really, if you're trying to persuade elected officials, you know, calling them every name in the book, describing how idiotic they are, things like that. I mean, do you want somebody telling you that? It's just not very persuasive. And I don't know that there was really any room for persuasion there to begin with, but at a certain point in time it certainly became an excuse for somebody to say, you know, well, good night, look at the nature of the communications I've received over this. There's just no way I can endorse this idea. You know, and it's sad that that happens, because I know people get passionate about it, and these elected officials, well, you know, you kind of have the ring of power there, and you're the ones that are determining what policy would be. And if that policy is not just a bad one, but it ruins people's lives, you know, I see why people get passionate and angry about it. It's just one of these situations where, you know, it'd be nice to have this kumbaya moment and we all get along, but it's not going to happen. Policies like this are not conducive for uniting the citizenry. They're really they're effective at dividing it. I try to put myself in their shoes. You know, if you've been a police chief or you've been a county prosecutor, you know, a large part of your career has gone to enforce this prohibitionary policy that we have. Well, in doing so, you're investing yourself into that policy. So it almost becomes personal to these people, just as personal as it does to those of us that oppose it. And you know, it's disappointing, especially in light of law enforcement against prohibition. There are other law enforcement personnel that have, you know, changed their mind about what has happened. You know, a real good example, Judge Jim Gray, the Libertarian vice presidential nominee at the moment. He was a Superior Court judge in California and had been, you know, locking people away for drugs for years. He finally reached a point where I guess maybe his conscience was just bothering him, you know, but he took the mental task upon himself to evaluate what was happening with that, and he come to the conclusion that we're just going down the wrong road and we're ruining people's lives. We're spending immense resources on something that we shouldn't even be doing to begin with.
If y'all permit me, I just want to, you know, speak plainly about this. I personally believe there's a great benefit to be had with the passage of some version of this. If you're the one that's on the other end of the handcuffs, legislation like this becomes very important.
I'd like to ask the Assistant City Clerk to read our oath of office.
I do solemnly swear that I possess all of the qualifications required by the statutes of the State of Missouri and the Charter of the City of Springfield, Missouri, to hold the office of council member in the City of Springfield, Missouri. I'm not subject to any of the disqualifications set forth in the Charter, that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States and of the State of Missouri, and the Charter and the ordinances of the City of Springfield, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office, so help me God.
Thank you, ma'am. Each one of these bills, with the exception of 254, would require us, in my opinion, to violate that oath, because we would be essentially ignoring state law. And not only ignoring state law, but encouraging and in fact mandating the police department of Springfield to do the same, which would in turn be a violation of their oath of office. Is that not right, Chief Williams?
Yes, ma'am.
Obviously, I disagree with that. You're in a position here, if we have federal laws that are contradictory to the Constitution of the United States, which we do, you know, as far as following your oath of office, what do you choose? Do you choose to follow the Constitution, or do you choose to follow federal laws? And You know, my choice is the Constitution. The war on drugs is not specifically authorized in our Constitution. It's just not. So it is in direct violation of the Constitution. It's not good federal law. And, you know, also in a way, it doesn't really matter what the Supreme Court has to say about that. They are not the final arbiter of what's constitutional and what's not. The people are. And, you know, I guess it's just going to be my task to remind my colleagues of that on occasion, that just because the Supreme Court says something's okay, it does not necessarily make it okay.
And we will be voting this evening. Before we vote, are there any comments by members of council?
Well, you know, I'd say there's two approaches. One is to get involved in local politics, you know, go to your city council meetings, introduce yourself to these people, become friendly with them, let them know when they do something right, because a lot of times you never hear that side of the coin. You really just get the brunt of the complaints of society. Now, I'm not sure how effective that would have been here in Springfield on this issue. The other strategy is that rather than playing nice with city council and trying to persuade them, you become city council. You run for office. You become the person that's in that seat that's making those votes and deciding policy. And I'd say it's probably going to differ from location to location as far as which strategy is going to get you better results. And I think it would probably depend on the mindset of those that are currently on whatever governmental body we're talking about. That, you know, if there is some support there already, that could, well, that could be harnessed and perhaps cultivated. If there's not much, well, if there's a lot of opposition, then I'd say probably the strategy is clear that you'll have to work to probably replace people that are sitting on that board.
But if it comes to the point that if I have to medicate, I'm going to move to a state that is more accepting at this point. Because I can't take prescription meds. They, you know, it's not an option for me. If I take prescription meds, I'm going to die. So what do you do?
My suggestion would be if states could adopt a law just like Initiative 502 or similar to Denver's, which does not have an unscientific per se DUI testing provision, and we convince the government that we need to, you know, reschedule this from a controlled one substance. It's not like heroin. It's not like PCP. It's not like LSD. It's not even as addictive as nicotine or caffeine. It's actually not physiologically addictive at all.
That's the point of thinking it's funny. It's not a joking matter. What we're doing is prohibiting a substance that has tremendous healing properties that we could be harnessing that we're not because of a mentality that's been brought about by false propaganda. To me, that's a shame. It's worse than a shame. It's a crime. As long as the internet is a free and unfiltered medium of exchange of ideas, that will continue, and hopefully at some point, you know, I think we're already approaching critical mass as far as voters that are really kind of fed up with this policy and realizes that it needs to change. So hopefully the next few years, that consensus is just going to be stronger, to where those that are sitting in the seats of power that are worried about their campaign contributions or what have you will go, wow, I'm going to be more successful if I'm going to vote more along the lines of freedom and liberty when it comes to this issue. That's the point we need to get at. You know, let's race to see how fast we can make it happen.
It is time for people like you and people like me to go back to the polls and begin voting and begin caring and beginning understanding that this is how the system works. It is not designed to help you. It is not designed to help you pursue your pursuit of happiness. It is designed to take your money, to steal from you, and to do it only so that the people who have figured out how to game the system can get rich. My organization is Americans for Forfeiture Reform. We do the basic ground level research and advocacy and coalition building that we need to take back our country, to take back our democracy. And mark my words, when we take this illegal money out of their hands, we will be able to win this war on drugs. Because we can pass all the medical statutes we want. California can legalize it. But until the federal government stops paying state and local law enforcement to ignore those state laws and keep doing these raids where they burst into dispensaries and put medical patients in wheelchairs and cuffs on the ground and kick them and take their money and then prosecute them and put them in jail where they have no good medical care, that's wrong. But that's our country, and it's our responsibility to take it back. Thank you.
It smells good. Here we go. Sissy, this is a lover's rock, and I don't ever want it to stop. No, this is a lover's rock. I better say, oh, you didn't say goodbye. That's for you. And live by, but I want to. Hit him again. So little Just swallow it, buddy. Second time, bro. voice and